This week on Generating Alpha, I'm back with Mickey Drexler, the merchant prince and one of the most influential minds in modern retail, for part two of our conversation. In this episode, we go beyond the early days and get into the mindset that made Mickey a once in a generation leader. We talk about why he's always had a distaste for corporate America, what good taste really means, and how he scaled Gap from 400 million to 14 billion in sales, turning it into one of the most iconic brands in the world. Mickey also opens up about the principles that guided his leadership, why brutal honesty matters, how to recognize real talent, and what it takes to stay creative in an environment that often rewards conformity. It's a masterclass in vision, taste, and conviction from someone who redefined what it means to build a brand that resonates. If you haven't yet, make sure you listen to part one, where we explored Mickey's childhood, his first jobs in retail, and the early lessons that shaped his career. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, rate it a 5 stars on Spotify, subscribe to YouTube, and share it with anyone passionate about business, creativity, and leadership. Thank you, and I appreciate it. Mickey, thank you for joining me for part two. I really appreciate it.
Oh, okay. My pleasure, Amir. You
So,
kept at it and you're persistent.
thank you, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, I want to talk a little bit about Gap. We didn't get to it in our
Okay.
in part one. You were the CEO of Gap for 19 years, if I'm correct, and from
Well, technically, president for 8 or 9, and then the balance CEO. So 19 years anyway.
19 years, and in that time period, sales went from 400 million to 14 billion dollars. And a big decision you made during that time was turning it from a discount retailer to private label. So tell me about what you think were the most major decisions you made during that time at Gap that took the company from 400 million of sales to 14 billion.
Well, you never think that about, I never did take it from here to here. My first CEO job was Ann Taylor, and the board asked for a long-term plan right at the beginning. And I don't really like long-term plans because long-term has stops and starts and stops and starts. But so I never thought about it ever. And things just happen organically. And but Gap was not considered a discounter, but practically speaking, it was a discounter. And I think if you look at most companies today in that world, they don't call themselves discounters, but go online, look at some of these companies, they're discounters or they're inflated prices. So the first thing in any business, uh, and how do I take it? I'm still trying to take things because you never really stop trying to outdo yourself. I just went through the fundamentals. I was an Ann Taylor at a young age. It was very, I guess, fortuitous. And I didn't go in with any lessons. I didn't learn how to take a business up, down, whatever. But I always followed my own gut feeling, along with you have to have a great team and you have to lead the great team, and learning from people who knew a lot more than I did. But I guess I always had some natural talents. I believe that about most people. They're born with certain talent, and people don't talk much about that. They say, "Well, can I learn this in school? How do you get to be this job?" I said, "There's no formulaic answer. I don't care where people go to college. I don't know about you, and I don't like to say this in front of certain parents. I really care about a lot of other things. Anyway, to get back to fundamentals on Gap, and I'll be a little uh, consistent on the process, and I don't like the word process. And this happened at Ann Taylor, at Gap, at J. Crew, and at Alex Mill now. Um, I get in, and the first thing I do, and I'll never forget, I left Ann Taylor Friday night. I flew out to San Francisco Sunday night to start my new job. And I was staying at Campton Place Hotel. Uh, and was I nervous? Beyond. here I am in a strange place, and I didn't know how strange it would be until I experienced my first day. My wake up call, ironically, was from Les Wexner, who had been recruiting me prior, and he told me that I was making a big mistake. I didn't even start the day yet. So he apparently they announced me that day. It leaked out, whatever. So I get to the office, took a taxi. There was no fancy moving. This is, 1980, I guess 83, and went into the office park, which I had been to before. That was a kind of a cultural shock in a way. I worked at 57th and Fifth Avenue running Ann Taylor. I'm a New York City guy, born in the Bronx. That was my town. So the first shock was, what am I doing here? Culturally, well, they're all equal shocks. I walked into the building. It took me very little time to know what I was up against. Culturally, um, process, the merchandise, the style, the lack of a point of view. And I'll never forget the first week, I didn't understand what anyone was saying. They had their own language. And I say, keep it simple. In fact, I'm writing some notes to the team now at Alex Mill. You must distill everything into its simplest definition so everyone understands. And I am the filter of minimal knowledge of complications. So I get there, park in the parking lot. It was an office park. I had never been in an office park in my life, nor do I ever want to be in one again. And the culture was beyond. Remember, I Bronx lived in Manhattan and Taylor after 12 years in the department store business. And I loved Ann Taylor, but we were taken over by Allied stores, which was, well, it's a symptom of what has happened in the last many years. So Allied stores, and it's true of Marriott taking over a better hotel company, someone buying, you know, a creative team. And what happened with Allied stores, I knew there was no future for me there culturally, or in many ways, they weren't my kind of organization I'd want to work for. And but I stayed for 4.5, 5 years. Why? I had a great job. They corporate, they left me alone because most people don't understand the fashion business or the nuances of any creative business, especially big corporations. By the way, this should be a bestseller because big corporations, Kelsey, send him the free uh, press story on big corporations. It was published last week. It is so right on. You have
Before we go back to the episode, I want to take a short break to talk about my sponsor, Row. The Generating Alpha podcast is presented by Row, the all-in-one banking platform for startups. Thousands of startups like Perplexity, Product Hunt, and more use Row. You get everything you need to manage your startup's cash. Fast banking setup, cards with up to 2% cash back, and yield that turns company cash into extra runway. All super important in the early days of launching. But the thing founders really love about Row is their team. They're obsessed with helping founders disrupt the status quo and will go to the end of the earth to help them to do so. And exclusively for Generating Alpha podcast listeners and viewers, you'll get a $1,500 statement credit plus a ton of exclusive perks when you manage your company cash with Row. Terms and conditions apply. To learn more, visit rho.co/generatingalpha. Row is a fintech, not a bank. Checking and card services provided by Webster Bank, member FDIC. See reward terms for details. Thank you, and back to the episode.
So the first day I get there, and it was, I had the most difficult time adjusting to
Wow.
the culture, to the city. Plus, remember, we're a public company. Not why should you remember? and the stock price and the business was doing horrible. In all due respect to Don, he was willing to try to fix it. I was the third person there. So I figured I didn't negotiate something that, huge package. I commuted to a hotel every week. It was kind of a pain in the ass, but I was a young guy and youngish, not as young as you, but and it was not good. I was very unhappy there. Why pressure, stock price dropping, inventory horrible. First day, I meet people and I go through inventory because the inventory is the liability. It's all that cash tied up in garbage. And I could tell so quickly that I was a foreigner there. And when I didn't finish the thought, when creative companies are taking over by corporate, non get it, it's over. The culture's over. It changes. Mercenaries, and everyone wants to make the money in their companies. But so I had a very rough start. I met all the people. I knew who would last, who wouldn't last. After, you have to meet them, and I'm a quick study, and I'm even quicker today because a lot of time, if you feel something, you say, well, they have this big job. When I was a young guy in the department stores, I left each of the jobs because I kind of was not very pleased with the inspiration, the strategy of my bosses, who all were very well, big deals, really big deals, fancy colleges, big deals. And I quit, but I didn't know what I was going to do. My third department store job. Oh, I got recruited by Ann Taylor. I don't know how it happened, but it saved my life really, because I didn't know what I was going to do. How to make a living, pay the bills and all that. So I was quite depressed. I couldn't connect to the environment there. Where do you live in Westchester, I think, or
I live in Greenwich.
Greenwich, Connecticut? Fancy. So anyway, so I was just, my wife and I had a very hard time adjusting, both of us. My son was 6 years old then, and it was just like a foreign country, and different people there, and back east, and all that. Uh, but everyone said, "Oh, it's a pretty city," but to me, I'd rather have the people, the vibe, the New York stuff. Not that any place is so great these days, especially in current conditions. So went through the assortments, met all the people, went home at the end of the day saying, what the hell did I get myself into here? Especially when the summer came around, because I used to go out to Long Island every weekend on Friday end of the day. In fact, I'm out in Bridgehampton right now. And I was Friday afternoons were the worst because I'd be in my car on the Long Island Expressway, and here I am in San Bruno, California, overlooking the airport, overlooking a cemetery and Highway 280. And I'll never forget at noon, it was a six-story building. I think we had two buildings, a lot of people, compared to Ann Taylor for sure. So at noon, there was the Hong Kong flight from SFO. And they would say, "Oh, there's the noon flight to Hong Kong." And I'm thinking the noon. They just that was the it was a different environment. They had a number of leaders. The company was going downhill. The company was started as a Levi's only company. Remember, well, why would you remember this? Founders invent to a degree, and when they don't know how to go to the next step, businesses suffer. Gap was invented as a Levi's only business. So, uh, 8 years after it started, 1976, fair trade laws, in 69 to 76, they had the best brand in jeans in the world. And even today, Levi's good, bad, whatever, you can't kill it. it's the gold standard. They weren't easy to do business. I inherited the company when about 1/3 to 40% was Levi's only, all discounted, by the way. And in those days, you the everyone was buying wash jeans. They had rigid denim, and I used to in high school wash my own jeans to make them soft. Anyway, it was just the merchandising was horrible, the culture, and there's no one to blame except always leadership. And Don was smart enough to know he couldn't take it to the next step. He tried a few times, and then there I was, miserable for the first year or so, trying to get it going. The stock dropped in half, and I was taking huge liquidation markdowns. I started in November and January, which is the last month of the fiscal year. I'm liquidating like crazy bad goods. And Don calls me into his office and says, "What are you doing? The earnings are going to be destroyed." And I get emotional. I said, "Yes, they have to be. We have cash tied up. If we don't take the markdowns, we don't have the cash to buy better goods." So it was very tough being a public company then. I was in my late 30s. I'd been never ran a company like that, and so I was feeling huge pressure. Stock was, I think when I got there, it was about $20, maybe it was 8 or 9. And the company was worth about 200, 300 million. By the way, when I left, it was in $6, $7 billion value, I think 10 billion or whatever. And I was fired in one day just to get to the end of this. I don't know if you read about that or anything.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So pressure, difficult. That summer was the Olympics. Business was horrible. Why? Because we were up against two for $26. And I don't know how I got through it. I guess I did. But I get a call. Don calls me one afternoon in August, whenever the Olympics were. He goes, "Our business is horrible. What's going on?" Can you say what's going on? You inherit a very ill organization that is, and I didn't realize how difficult, except in hindsight, doing what we did there. Now, I went through a lot of people. I put on every single desk in headquarters, I don't know how many people, 2,000, 3. I didn't understand anything they said. And so I put keep it simple. I didn't add the keep it simple stupid part, but I put a keep it simple plaque or whatever on every desk in the corporation. And no one taught me any of this. Everything is logical, in my opinion. You follow your gut, you test it, you make mistakes. So this one woman who was in technology, she thought she was going to patent to whoever her strategy. And she was my incentive to keep it simple. When you don't understand something and you have to distill things down to their simplest definition, understanding in every area of the business. I look at things today, nothing's simple anymore. And technology has contributed to that in a way. I mean, it's great and it's not so great. I think it's taken a lot of creativity out of the world because there's a lot of dependency on design. I think the cars are all designed by the same computer today. And I used to love, product classics. I used to collect old, beautiful cars I longed for as a kid. I don't, once you get over that, you're over it. But I find America, maybe the world, has been on this downward trend on whatever. And so I did this thing. Well, I was there 18 years. Banana Republic was owned by Gap. When I got there, they bought Pottery Barn. Now, here you have, and this happens a lot. You can't take care of the two businesses you own. Banana was that was a tough one. I never really felt I did that very well. And Gap. And then we buy Pottery Barn. And then Steve Jobs, when I went to Steve Jobs, Apple, he was recruiting me and I didn't want to be on any boards, not smart. And a year later, 1 year, he says, I'll join Gap's board if you join my board. Took me 1 millisecond. I said, deal. Because I knew Steve would be Steve, disruptive, difficult, uh, a little arrogant, but I loved the guy. And he did everything as the doctor ordered. Um, so he was, I kind of enjoyed it. But a year later or so, he calls me one night and I'm hopping around. So if you want to pull me back into anything, this is after 18 years. He calls me 9 o'clock after a board meeting, Monday, May 26, who's counting, whatever day it was. And he says they didn't tell him they were firing me because he was my friend. And he said, I just got a call from Don, you're getting fired in the morning. I said, Steve, no one looked at me tonight. And I knew the turnaround was in. It was in. We had a bad year, whatever. And no one looked at me. So I called Don, come into the office 8 o'clock. I'm hopping forward. I'll go back during this. So he hands me a one-pager note, 18 years, 400 million, 14 billion, started Old Navy, dot, dot, dot. And I looked at it was my last day. And I said, you know, I've been protecting and watching over your assets for the last 18 years. And it was stunning. Anyway, I was, needless to say, stunned. I went in to see the board and they ushered me out within 2 minutes because I don't know, it was just so disrespectful. And if I think back, I would have, this is how many years ago, I probably should have gotten mad. But the interesting thing is when someone asked me, how did you feel about getting fired by, these, I said, you want to know something? They fired me. Who's to say they're the authorities to know that they should have fired me? And I knew the turn was in. I left, and they said I could stay till they replace me. I continued to do. I was a shareholder, and a lot invested there, but I didn't do it because of that. Because I liked it. I had pride in what I do. It wasn't pleasant the way I was treated. I They ushered me out. Then I went to see someone who I thought was a reasonable person on the board, but very lawyering in a lot of companies. So I went in to see him. I said, this is not a way to treat people. I said, no respect. I said, and by the way, it was terrible for the company. Needless to say, just the way they did it, and long term, it's never been the same. It's another story. So he ushered me right out of the office rudely, just like they ushered me out of the boardroom. I was like chopped liver with these people. It was like whatever. So I worked my ass off. We turned it around. Don called me to congratulate me on the turnaround. Whatever. I could go through hours. Anyway, I got there every day. I just did what I do. Merchandising, merchandising. I got rid of all. And how do you define ugly clothes? You can't, everything is, I don't care what anyone says, as I say, you're not learning in college how to invent or design a beautiful car, which is a whole other story I have on cars. And it wasn't like I was from the manor born, but I did always, I think my Bronx grade school buddy said I was well dressed, whatever that means. So I was there very unhappy. It was just weird. And the pressure the first couple of years. Oh, I remember this. We actually turned it around very quickly, a year and a half. But I'll never forget, we were in Carmel, California, which I never want to be there again. And that was then. And it was such a depressing 2 days. It was an off-site. We had bankrupt contingency. And
Wow.
I'm sitting there, I'm 40 years old or whatever, and I'm, you know, sitting there scared shitless and thinking, oh, also, well, this is all stuff that, and I didn't have a penny to my name. I owned the company $500,000 on a loan. The stock, my options weren't worth anything. I didn't even have that many, and they weren't vested anyway. So we're sitting there talking about what happens if the business doesn't turn or whatever. We have to make a plan. I'll never forget sitting in that room with about 15 of us, all these executive meetings, they're all just hot air and all that. And I'm scared to hell. What am I going to do? I'm not fearless. I was fearful. Someone asked me today, how did I do that Gap job? Or how did I do the companies I do? I said, I live with fear every day in my life. You got to protect it. So, year and a half passes. We redid 400 stores. We got rid of all the crap. I hired a creative team. They were actually the two key players were from Ann Taylor. They both moved. Well, one moved to California, the other was in New York. And I'll never forget this. It was the middle of August, and right around my birthday, August 17th or whatever.
My birthday's one day after.
You're kidding.
No.
Isn't that funny? So um, the goods come in. Don was a builder. So we redid 400 shops in 6 or 8 months, which was pretty amazing. And I don't know anyone else could have done that except him. So we filled it with goods and like a rocket, like an effing rocket ship. We had the new Gap. And I knew Gap from Fall Into. The Gap was a very famous thing. Gap, the good news is it was famous as a business. It had been great. Now it was going downhill. Everyone knew the name. So it's much easier, like with J. Crew, to take on a business that has critical mass and is a well known name, even if it's not a good name. But, it's familiar. And every morning, I'll never forget, I used to call a taxi, leave it on the speaker, then the commercials fall into the Gap. I don't know if you ever heard that, um, but it took off like a rocket, stock like a rocket. And it lasted until 19, the market crashed, I think in 87 ish. We had a really tough August, and I was scared again. I was always afraid of this, that, and being public. Your friends are your short-term friends mostly, and if you think they're your friends long-term, they're usually not. I found out with my private equity partners. I found that out at Gap Corporation. I find that out in the world. You know, People think, oh, they're my friend. Don't think that. Wait until you have a problem. See how friendly they are. So I went through the turnaround, amazing. The stock was going crazy. 1987, it went from 70 plus dollars up from 20 back down to $18 a share. But it's funny. I was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal then, and I haven't read that. I read it a number of years back, and I was kind of proud of myself with what I said because the reporter said, "How do you feel? You went from $75 million net worth to 18 million." And the 18 was a lot to me. I didn't have anything, but except I did pay off the loan, I think, at Gap, 500,000. And I said, it's long term. And I meant it. I said, you don't do anything. Turnarounds, I don't even like the word turnaround because to me, in the two jobs I've had the longest, well, even until it was 5 years and we turned it around, it was a rocket ship. Gap, 18 years. And I don't say it was a turnaround. It was a building a new brand, a new company. And that's what we did. Change the image. You got to marry the product. And all of it really is creative instinct, gut, and the right people and the right operating people, the right fine. It's a symphony. So, and then I started. I think I told you the old Navy story.
You
That
did, yes.
that was my, in my career. That was well. I liked Madewell and Old Navy as career. The other companies were reinvented, and they were much easier to do. Although Old Navy was beyond. Uh, Madewell took 5 or so years, but they both ended up being very valuable. So I spent 18 years there. Uh, we moved into the city, thank God, where our offices were. We took over the old Banana Republic space, and it was hard. It was hard for me because, I don't know any directors, good, not good, who understood the fashion business. And the and I was in the fashion business, but I considered it a product business. I don't consider it like today, fashion, designer clothes. Forget about it. $5,000 for a sweater or 3,000. But I consider in my strategy. I mean, it wasn't known to me that I like clothes like what you're wearing. You have a crew neck. That's cashmere or Shetland. What is that?
Cashmere, I think.
So that's fancy, but that's nice. And you can own that forever. Button down shirt.
It's actually a polo.
Oh, it's a polo shirt. Okay, well,
Yeah,
all you need is the fake white collar,
exactly.
whatever. But I think the world, for me, it was always style, taste, but don't ask me where it came from. But I always felt that. And when I did, I'll tell you why I did Gap. Um, or, well, I had a list of styles when I worked at the department store. Not until I was thinking one day maybe I'll do this. It's not like today. Oh, give me 10 million or 20. Oh, here it is. Just go spend it. But they'll run the business. They own the business, whatever. So I had a list of styles in the American uniform-ish. I always felt things were a little more expensive that I liked than I could afford. Ralph Lauren was kind of, I couldn't afford it really. Um, that was, yeah, because I was in my mid early 30s. And I said, there needs to be a business out there where you can dress nicely. I always said, right from the beginning, good taste and style doesn't cost anything extra. But in fact, when you have that, whether it's cars, whether it's homes, it enhances the value of every product. But I said, personally, I used to get Ralph Lauren wholesale because uh, his assistant was my roommate's cousin. So I got half off. So I liked what he used to do. I still do actually. And so I did that and started the new Gap. I had a list of, it was about color, it was about nice goods, it was about fair pricing, it was about integrity and creativity. And and there was some moments in all my companies where where I had jobs, and I'll never forget the first day Gap began. I said, "Well, Gap is a jeans company." We didn't even wash jeans in those days. They were all rigid jeans. We had well, you're too young, but they had the stitched back pockets. Everything was on sale. It was garbage. In fact, when I started, you got to go to the stores. That's where you learn everything. My big shot bosses, they never even went to the selling floor when the corporate offices were in the main department store buildings. So I traveled around, not fancy. I was alone. I visited. I was in Houston Galleria one day, Because when I was going back and forth every weekend, I'd stop in a city, I'd look at shops, and I just was always very driven to do well. That's a whole other subject. It was in Houston Galleria, big shopping mall. I parked my rented car there, and I see these, what's it called when the windshields have these pieces of paper on them? There's a word for that,
Yeah, yeah, I know what you're
whatever
talking
that
about.
word is.
Yes.
Uh, so I look at, today only, Gap 30% off. Oh my God. So I walked in, I said, Hector, he was the store manager, who I didn't know, but I said, what's going on here? He said, well, when business gets tough, we put the windshield, whatever, on the cars, and then we give a discount. So Hector's deciding the worldwide strategy of Gap that day. And, it's logical. I've always looked at everything as simple and what feels right. And I didn't grow up like, oh, windshield, whatever. That's not good. I just said, what the hell's going on? Nicely. Because, I'm the strange guy. I come in. And Hector and we got along. I learned. These were all little learnings, and I still learn every day. Little learnings about the company, the culture, the business. And it was a huge scale. Ann Taylor, when I got there, was 25 million, turned it around dramatically. I left it maybe 75 million or 100. And the
Wow.
pressure there was strong, but I was in New York City and I didn't worry about getting kicked out of the state. Um, but there, but at Gap, it was, not an easy run. After 3 or 4 years, kind of got into the lifestyle thing there, but always a different culture. So, um, Gap, taste, style. I did Gap. Am I finished with Gap or Old Navy? What am I up to?
Yes. Yes.
Huh?
You're finished with Gap. Yes.
Okay. What am I up to now? Old Navy-ish? So those are the
Um,
early Gap days. I'm trying to cover the very
yeah.
salient points. But go ahead.
I Yeah, I think you covered all the important points, but one thing I really want to touch on is you obviously have a very different approach than these leaders that came before you and after you. And I think a lot of it can be kind of centered around how you see your role as a leader. So, like, I'd love for you to just put it into words. What do you see the role of a CEO as, or a leader in any sense?
It's a good question. I don't think there's enough of that thinking today. I'm a big critic of large corporations. Um, and again, I created two of them, but every person was important. I was there, and I didn't say people call me a mentor today. Well, you probably read stuff, but that it's someone who you look at it, someone who's a role model, maybe. And this all comes, and I'm doing better today, learn more and better at my job. I said this yesterday than ever before in my life. I mean, because when you're online, it's all your own money, and I have all this great history, but I didn't spend a lot of time negotiating in a corporation. Dot dot dot. So the leadership, it just came naturally. If I meet someone, no matter who they are, politicians once in a while, 3 minutes, do they have it or not? And my interviews now, I don't want to ever be the first or no, the last or the first. I interview everyone. Alex Mills is a small company that I'm so ambitious to make really successful for the team that's there. And that's who I work for. Who gets something done better in a company easier than the big boss? So I really work for the team and I'm very active. They call me a micromanager. I'm not a micromanager. If you don't recognize the small stuff, you're not going to recognize the big stuff. I'm a customer through and through. I like simple. Not much different than Steve. We were together 16 years. Keep it simple and keep it well designed and he was just taken way too early for what he would have done for the world. But, for me, the leadership role, direct, I'm difficult, but you have to be. When I ask people, I always say, "Who is your best boss?" I used to ask that all the time. Now it's 5 minutes, and I know energy, dot, dot, dot. A little adversity, I like a lot of it because I grew up with adversity, but I like adversity because you're fighting all the time to do better. And but then I used to think too much because you think, oh, they have a fancy resume, they have this, they have that, but I schmooze and I hire and I fire. I fired a lot of people actually over time because the leaders, and most leaders, this is important. Most people in big companies suck up to the bosses. Think about it. I don't know if you have any experience with that. And I find out because I schmooze, I like to talk to people, and I think they trust me, even though I could be not easy. And I always find out their opinion of the boss is much more accurate than the boss's opinion. Well, I don't know if you ever worked and they had to suck up to someone. I don't know if you did. Maybe teachers, who knows? But that's it's a very well-known American pastime. Treat your boss well, show respect, hello, and whatever, because he or she has your future in their hands. It's a really bad system because the feedback from any subordinate is so much more meaningful than it is from your boss. Oh, they're very smart, they're very nice, da, 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 da. When I ask people, I always used to ask, I interview a lot. I've always interviewed tons because if learned this at Ann Taylor, if I met some woman there, I mean, it was 25, 30 people, man, woman, we're schmoozing in the little office. I didn't know them. I didn't meet them. After 4 or 5 minutes, I said, they are not qualified to work here to myself. And, I was 35 years old. I never ran a company, but common sense. I decided that moment that it's not fair to, it was a her, hire her when she in fact will not succeed. And from that moment on, especially in a small company, I interviewed everyone. And I do the same now in another small company. The other big companies, I interviewed all the customer facing jobs and certainly in merchandising and whatever. So, um, but that's important. So as a leader, I have the responsibility because the buck, I say the buck stops here. I always felt, even at Bloomingdale's, that I was owned my own company, my two departments, and I was happy when I made last year's figures. No one taught me any of that, but I was very ambitious, I guess. But I was kind of quietly ambitious because a lot of the fancy Dans, I'm gonna be da da da. I never played my cards. I didn't have any cards to play to be a big shot or suck up. I never sucked up. I mean, always respected my bosses, even though, I mean, to them, if I came home and I said, Peggy, something, dot, 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 dot. Anyway, so leadership, critical, confidence, critical. I don't know who the great leaders are today. I know these big corporations. I'll send you this article. I love the article because I felt that bureaucrats are famous. It's a definition, in my opinion. Try to reach a CEO. Try to get someone to answer a phone. Try to do anything. I call, I used to call, and every call gets returned. And there's a reason for that. It's kind of kismet also. It's my new word. Yes, I started to think, see, I want my name out there now. because I validate. And it seems like a lot of people know who I am. And, that's fine. But now I sign customer service is a lost art. And respect, getting back to a customer quickly. So, it's very hard in a small company like ours. But in the big companies, Gap, every customer, J. Crew, every customer, and every person that worked there. I go into the shops. They were my friends, and I learned from them. You don't learn anything as much as you learn from a person on the sales floor or a person on the factory floor, because they will tell you everything that's wrong. And you can't be intimidating, because I had bosses who, I just met a woman this morning who worked at Bloomingdale's in my Soul Cycle class. I know her husband, and we talked about some people there, but I think for me, approachable. I have everyone call me Mickey. Why? Because automatically the Mr. or Ms. or whatever creates a barrier. And I don't want there to be any barrier between me as the big shot, which I never feel that. That's a whole other thing. And the people. And I remember when I was a young person, everyone was Mr. And if they only said, call me whatever, Richard or this, it would have made a much more comfortable relationship. But the hierarchy is, and I assume today it's the same way. It's a hierarchy, this world. And in most cases, there's companies, I don't want to say all companies like that, because they're not. But in my experience, that's the general kind of description. Big is not best. Big and acting small is best. And it all starts from the leadership. And if you look at a business today, especially in my business, I don't know about banking or anything like that. Um, I love what I do because it's always changing. Every day is a challenge. But if you look at the businesses today, um, there's builders of them. I learned this probably later on. Don invented a business. You can see inventions out there, and you have to take it to the next step, or else find someone who can do that. And I know, well, there's a lot of startups, I won't say them publicly, where invention and then hello, what's the next level? You have to see around corners. You have to figure out instinctively. And as a detective, I'm a detective. I'm addicted to detective stories, because if you find DNA at all, my DNA is different. It might be a picture in a magazine. I cut out little things that give me an idea. Today, I've just been here all day with ideas. They come and they come. I mean, I'm reading these articles. A lot of them, it's about me. Some whatever. Because uh, someone who works with me wants to do a short book. I don't like long, because I don't read long books, and I just want a kind of a pithy little lessonish book, quotes and all that. I don't know if you read my Instagram or LinkedIn. Do you? Or
I've checked out your Instagram. Yeah.
yeah, you look at LinkedIn also, because like today, yeah, LinkedIn's interesting. I don't even know how to, 16 years on the Apple board. I used to use a BlackBerry until Steve busted me. And find, and he was, he invented a monopoly. Think about it. He invented a monopoly. And, but anyway, so leadership is, I don't think you learn it. I think you have it. And that's why I like people who have drive. And I always kind of connect that with their childhood, their growing up, their environment. I like adversity. You're a smart guy. You're probably going to go to a fancy. Where do you go in Greenwich? Is private school there that's fancy, I think, or no public
No,
school?
I go to a public school.
That's good. I don't know why it's good, but as long as you don't take yourself too seriously. Oh, by the way, speaking of school, one school that changed my life, I went to PS 76 in the Bronx. I got into Bronx Science, which, you take a test. You don't have someone write a letter, who makes a contribution, but it's changed my life. That's a whole other story. But because I was the first one in my family, there was 8 cousins. My grandparents were from Poland. This is on my mother's side, who went to college in the 60s. It was pretty surprising. Anyway, so leadership encompasses so much, and every day, even today, I learned I had to say that I'm just always adamant. They always know exactly how I feel. But I also think I lived in my imagination as a kid. I don't know where the ideas come from. Today I get an email saying, I love this. We have an email today on a jacket, and one of our associates, Tracy, says, I love this jacket. Wow. And I loved it too. And then I said, simple. So I sent an email to the team and I said, for holiday, we ought to have an I love list because it says it all. Men's, I love this, and women's, I love this. And then the other thing is, I said, women who love men's share love for men's clothes because a lot of women wear men's clothes. And then the other list today, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I'm always thinking keep it simple. The Because you have to do that. The world's complicated. I mean, I'm not a technologist. I really am intimidated, but thank God I have people who help me out on that. But on the subject of leadership, honest, open, say what you think. I just told a woman I was speaking to her today. I mean, I'm always kind of speaking to someone. And I was asking her about some people who work for her. And she mentioned a woman who has a bad attitude. And I agree with her. And I said to Michelle, I said, Michelle, you speak to her and I'll speak to her too. You can't work here if you have a bad attitude, or I call them, you're a doctor. No. I don't like people who say you can't do this. I'm allergic to that. And so I said, and speak to her now. I don't want her not being nice and having an attitude here. I know she does a lot. And she's well liked, popular, but that doesn't mean anything. So she says, she spoke to her today. It was just right after the course. She goes, you're right. I'll speak to her. So then she called me back. A follow up is critical for me. I want it fast, and I have rules, but a lot of people don't send emails or texts back quickly enough or return calls. I have a rule on that. It's rude not to get back quickly, and I'm always nagging. They can tell you, if you ever want to talk to, well, Kelsey can tell you everything. So she said to her boss, who she goes, well, I don't agree. So I said to Michelle, I said, that's our first problem, being defensive and not listening. So she's on a list. And I said to Michelle, you know, I want to speak to her with you. And Michelle said, let me do it myself, which is fine because I want people who are can do people, or they're good at saying, look, it's not going to work this way. So leadership, I did every job that anyone else can do. I've been there and done it. And from working in shipping rooms in the garment business, when my father had a job, I always worked, whether it was menial or not, because I liked having a little extra spending money. And my father was a bad role model. So part of it, he became a good role model because I never wanted to be like him, you know? was good. I said, I don't want to be him. So that was, I can thank him for that part, I guess. All right, you interrupt me, man.
I'd love to kind of pick on that thread of Steve Jobs because many people look up to him as one of the greatest leaders or entrepreneurs ever. And you spent
I do. I
16
do.
years on the Apple board. I'd love to. What are a couple lessons you learned from him that you think the world would be better off knowing?
Well, he put me on the board because he rolled out shops. And he is, first of all, he doesn't give up on anything. The lessons we identified together, he recruited me because he wanted to, he's so smart and visionary, which is proven. But he also was, I always say Steve Jobs. So once in a while, someone would say, "Oh, I want to talk to him." Some other big shots. Both of them. One of them comes out of his office. I was sitting in this big shot's office. He calls Steve. I fix them up on the call. And he walks out and he says, someone you know, but I'm not going to mention names. Who does he think he is? I'm, I'm bigger than him, meaning his company was, in fact, at that point, bigger. Steve, um, he was so visionary. And, he and Johnny Ives they were a great couple. And Johnny and he, I think, had lunch almost every day. And by the way, if you don't, for me also, the creatives are the future of every business, like operators. I'm an operator. I like to build and I like this. Steve he spoke over my head a lot. He would start and he would talk about the future. He was going to do a car. He was going to get very involved in education. And remember, he got fired there. So he came back in 1999. And, leadership destroys companies. And they put this guy in there. I forgot his name. I didn't, but I don't want to mention his name. It's not a secret. They had two guys there. And every great company doesn't stay great unless you find the right talent. If you look at any company that's great, except me, I don't know if just look at the top men or women who set the tone, or the three or four of them. In my world, it's much more complicated, I think, because the nuances of, you know, it's not a commodity business. It's a business where I'm looking for something. Well, I don't see anything worth holding up, but it's a business that is fingertips. It's a gut. It's a feel. It's taking the investments. I compare our business, and I learned most. I never really learned a lot from others. I learned what not to do, but I try to explain that you have the cash. I don't have anything on me to. I have an AirPod, but you have the cash. You see the styles. I said, invest in the styles with your cash that will give you a good return. Now, that means very simply, you buy the right stock and you get a better return on your investment. And, if you bought gold, these days you get a better return. But the business of business is not simple. I just learned something. I don't know if this is true. Um, I'm friendly with, to me, the best retailer in the world is TJ Maxx, because they have honest, fair prices. So I'm friendly with the CEO now. She's chief merchant, the best. And really, their prices are honest. The whole world now is playing price games, in my opinion, because mark it up, put it on sale, assistant buyers days. They're starting to discount already for holiday. I don't trust prices. And when I was a young person, when I was working, actually, yeah, no, I always felt one thing at Bloomingdale's, there was a meet the competitor's price rule. And to this day, most people violate that. And I never did but now I see if you go into a couple of my old companies, you'll see today, I get crazy if someone says, oh, this company, I won't mention the names here. Oh, they're doing great. They're cool. I said, why don't you feel the merchandise? I said, also go online. Their pricing is online discounting. In the shop, you pay full price. I'll never forget when I was a young guy. Well, I was always a young guy. I call young, it's all relative. I never thought I was a young guy. But I'll never forget in San Francisco when my son, I think it was like 6 or 7, there was a thing called Kush balls. I don't know if this, they were soft little spongy balls, and they were a hot item a million years ago. So I'm walking down Laurel Village, a little shopping street, and there's a five and dime, and then there's a like a toy store chain or an independent toy store. So I went to get a Kush ball. I just picked, well, I looked at the price. I bought it, I guess the first shop, I mean, they're all $3. And I'll never forget this. The five and dime, same exact product. It's not like a restaurant where they make better food here or there, was about $1 cheaper. Maybe it was 250 against 350. Never would I ever shop. That's how I am. I'll never shop in that store again. I don't trust them because, but the world today is so different. you
Yeah.
know, be a discounter, be this, that, or the other thing. So I'm not sure where I was going on this, but you'll get me back to where I should
I
go.
I think you kind of made the point I was getting at. And I mean, I usually ask this one kind of covered all that I think we should cover. And this is one question I ask every guest at the end of every show. So I'm 16 right now. If you were to give one piece of advice to a 16-year-old today, it can be life advice, it can be career advice, any type of advice, what would it be?
Okay. Well, the advice is if you feel it about a person or a subject, it is, especially at 16. Because when I was 16 and in high school, I knew the teachers I did not like and the ones I liked. Even in grade school, I loved Mr. Barrett, my math teacher. I couldn't stand. I didn't like school because for a lot of reasons I didn't listen well. I didn't really learn much, and my mission was to get through. But advice is work as a kid. I don't know if you work summer jobs, work. I always was forced to work. One thing my father gave me was a work ethic. Why? Because of his nastiness. He didn't like me not working, but that's the whole other thing. Um, learn if you don't know something, say, I don't know. There's a lot of know it alls around. And, but these are general principles of life. Um, look, for me, I was a very shy kid, but I always privately worked hard. I was very competitive. I didn't realize how competitive I still am. There's these are traits. The advice is I don't know if you can teach someone like you. I don't know your background. This is all a one-way thing, so maybe I'll do one on you, a podcast. But you seem like a nice guy, and carry yourself well and cool. So what else? Don't worry about right now what your life's going to be like. Every young kid I know, including my young grandchild, 7 years old. What school am I going to go to? What of this am I going to go to? Harvard Business School. I wouldn't hire anyone from there because it's a ticket, by the way. If and it's hard to say because everyone has a different sense. I don't know. I could never have been a doctor. I didn't know ever in my life I would be where I am today. And I never kind of said, oh, I want to be whatever. And most people I know aren't, I don't consider anyone, I don't feel a lot of people are successful. But I think the world is becoming lower standard, like this on a trend. People who are in charge of product companies need to be product people. And And I say always, if you read all my quotes, I have a quote book, but someone gave it to me as a gift. But every time you have a right product, you got to match it up with the right marketing, especially in this world today. Get knocked down, you get back up, you never give up. And what I also like is don't listen to anyone except yourself if you believe in it. I have done more things that they say don't do. Now, make mistakes. Why did I go to Gap? It was a shit company. And I went because you see something.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I don't, but most CEOs are not inventors or creative. In my industry, oh my God, I just find it, again, I'm not from the manor born, but I like nice things. I like to be proud of what I do. And I've had people say a really wonderful career, but I'm learning every day,
Yeah.
every single day. And I'm learning more now than ever because I don't have the interference of bureaucrats.
Yes.
You know,
Freedom. You have the freedom. Yeah.
at Bloomingdale's, even that was a job. A&S, you know, I never, if you made a suggestion, they looked at you like you were an idiot, you know. So, all right, I know what else?
Yeah.
Anything else you want to go over?
No, it was incredible having you on. I really appreciate it. It was a great two conversations, and I'm looking forward to speaking more in the future off the record.